What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. Today, I'll be ranking every single NASCAR Cup Series race from the 2025 season. This will go from 36, which is the worst, to number 1, which is the best. This will not include any of the exhibition events. This will not include the Cookout Clash. It will not include the Daytona Duels, and it will not include the All-Star race at North Wilkesboro. So anyways, let's go ahead and just jump straight into it. In the number 36 position, I have the Food City 500 from Bristol Motor Speedway. This is one of my least favorite Bristol Motor Speedway races that I probably ever watched, to be honest. It was almost as bad as the night race at Bristol in 2024. Not much happened. Once Kyle Larson got the lead in this race, there was literally nothing that happened. The only cautions that came out in this race was maybe one for Shaven Gisbergen spinning out, and outside of that, nothing really happened in this race. Kyle Larson pretty much dominated the event. The racing wasn't that good. There wasn't a lot of passing on the track. Very difficult to pass. It was very uninspiring. Not good racing on the track, and again, it's one of the least compelling Bristol races I've ever watched. For a lot of people, probably the worst race of the year. It wasn't that good. Very frustrating to watch, and for me, just an awful race at Bristol. One of the worst I've probably ever seen up to this point. In the number 35 position, I have the Iowa Corn 350 from Iowa Speedway. Last year in 2024, I thought the race was a lot better than this one. This race, nothing happened in this event. It was nearly impossible to pass in this race. And when there was passing, it was because there were a ton of cautions that happened. What made this race so much worse, in my opinion, was that stretch of time where there were so many cautions back to back to back. And when I'm not a big fan of Caution Fest, when you have a race that has like 10 or 11 cautions pretty much in a row, and there's not much going on, and you're under caution for so much of the event, it's not really fun to watch. And the fact that you couldn't really pass at the end either was what made this race really bad. I don't think it's a track issue, it's a car issue more than anything else, but for me it was not a good race. Nothing happened in the event. William Byron picked up the win in this race. Not very inspiring and not a good race, and one of the worst short track races I've probably ever seen in the 20 years I've been a fan of this sport. In the number 34 position, we have the Go Bowling at the Glen from Watkins Glen. This is worse than the race in 2023, in my opinion. There was literally nothing that happened in this race. Maybe until the end, where there maybe was a little bit passing at the end once the tires wore. But to be honest, when I look at races like at Watkins Glen, for instance, I've watched Watkins Glen races that have been a lot better than this. And granted, the best guy won the race in Shaven Gisbergen, but the fact that Shaven Gisbergen early in the race was clearly faster than Ryan Blaney and could not get by him should tell you everything that is wrong with the next-gen car at road courses, because there's a lot of air issues at a track like that. For me, it just wasn't a good race. It was a good winner, but I think the race itself, not much compelling happened. It was not the most exciting event. Wasn't as crazy as 2024 either. You had the good finish in 24. This race wasn't good. It was not a great race, in my opinion. In the number 33 position, we have the Cookout 400 from Martinsville Speedway. The other race, the Xfinity 500, we're going to talk about later. I thought that race was so much better than this one. Was this the worst Martinsville race we have seen in the next-gen era? No, I still think the 2022 race in the spring was way worse than this one. But for some reason, this race, compared to even the fall race in 2024, outside the manipulation, this race just, nothing really happened in my opinion. Not anything really inspiring happened. It was very difficult to pass. Not much going on. Not as bad as the race in 24, I would say, but still in the spring, I should say. But this race, really not much happened in the event. Very uninspiring. Not a great race in my opinion. And Fox also didn't do a good job with their coverage. It was not a great race in my opinion. That's why it is 33rd on the list. In the number 32 position, I have the Jack Lynx 500 from Talladega Superspeedway. When I think of some of the worst super speed races we have seen, I think of the race in 2018 where literally nothing happened, the fall race. I think of some of the other races that we have seen at Talladega where you had single file throughout the whole entire event. This race, nothing really happened. It was just a ton of gridlock. And granted, we actually got a really close finish at the end of the race, but close finishes don't always mean we had a great race overall. In the finish itself, where Cinder picked up the win, the reason was because there was a ton of gridlock in this race. This is one of the biggest issues of the next-gen car we've seen on super speedways is a gridlock, and it was really shown at this race at Talladega. Nothing inspiring really happened from the event. Yes, you had maybe a wreck or two that happened in the race, but also the coverage for the event really didn't help either Fox and maybe the worst broadcast going to commercial with less than 10 laps to go was one of the dumbest things I've seen from a broadcast partner in the sport. For me, it was not that great of a race. It was very uninspiring. Not much happened for super speedway standards. I thought the fall race was way better than this one for sure. It wasn't that great. I think it was one of the least uninspiring races we have seen at Talladega in quite some time. Not a big fan of the gridlock, and I think that definitely needs a change in the future. In the number 31 position, I have the Ward 400 from Texas Motor Speedway. I've seen a lot of people say this race was a lot better than it was, and I'm really shocked that people thought this race in any way, shape, or form was really, really good. Now, I don't think it's bad as some other races, but I think this race for Texas standards was a little better than some of the other Texas races. This is definitely better than the 2022 edition, and certainly better than maybe even the 2023 edition as well. But I have not been a big fan of Texas Motor Speedway, and even the next-gen car really cannot save the racing at Texas Motor Speedway. Yes, it got a crazy finish at the end, and maybe a decent finish at the end, but the racing itself just wasn't that great. It wasn't that fun to watch overall. You got Joey Logano getting his only win of the season in that race. There was just no passing whatsoever. People forget in the beginning of the race, because of how chaotic it got, people forget there was literally no passing in this race, and you could not pass and get up to the front. So for me, that's a big reason why I was not a fan of this race. It wasn't that exciting. The racing wasn't good in general in the race, and to me, for Texas standards, it might have been a little better, but still one of the least compelling races we have seen of 2025. In the number 30 position, I have the Auto Trader Echo Park Automotive 400 from Dover Motor Speedway. Dover Motor Speedway has been one of those tracks that has unfortunately been hurt by the next-gen car, and unfortunately this year was no exception. Now, I will say you had a decent finish at the end of the race, and you had some good battles throughout the day, and you did have a compelling race going on at points, but to me, the next-gen car really came into play. There were times where Denny Hamlin was faster than Chase Elliott in the race, and he clearly couldn't get by Chase Elliott. There were other times where drivers would be clearly faster than other guys in front of him because Dover has a lot of dirty air issues. You really couldn't pass. This has been a problem with Dover. I thought the race last year, though, was certainly better than this one. I just wasn't too inspired by the racing at Dover. It wasn't an awful race by any stretch of imagination. Also, having the rain delay didn't help either, to be honest. It kind of hurt the race a little bit to me. It wasn't the most exciting event overall. It had a decent finish, but the racing wasn't that great. It was not the worst Dover race I've ever seen, but it wasn't that great. For me, it had a decent finish with Hamlin picking up the win, but the racing wasn't overall that exciting. In the number 29 position, I have the Great American Getaway 400 from Pocono Raceway. This was, of course, Chase Briscoe's first win with Joe Gibbs Racing. I gotta be honest, this race was not as bad as some people made it out to be, but it was clear as day that a lot of the field issues and a lot of the field things we've seen with the next gen have kind of been exploited, and there's no exception to this. That finish was one of the most frustrating finishes that I have seen. I don't think the whole entire race was actually that awful, but the end of the race is one of the reasons why this score was down. The fact that Denny Hamlin and guys behind him, because of how bad the dirty air has been, I thought that really hurt this race quite a bit. Yes, it was really cool to see Chase Briscoe pick up the win, but to be honest, it was definitely frustrating to watch. The fact that Briscoe, who was basically running half throttle, was able to pull away from the field was not the most exciting thing overall. It was cool to see Briscoe get that win, but not that great of a finish, to be honest. Not the most exciting, and probably not one of the better races I've seen at Pocono. It was better than some other Pocono races, but that's not saying much considering the history of Pocono. In the number 28 position, I have the Cracker Barrel 400 from Nashville Super Speedway. Generally, this race, I don't remember much from it. I will say the battle at the beginning of Stage 3 between William Byron, Ryan Blaney, and I think Carson Hocevar was up there as well. I thought that battle was actually probably the best part of this race, and I think that was a good moment. Outside of that, this race was not that awe-inspiring. I think what really helped is the Amazon coverage. I think that made this race a little better than it really was because there were a lot of dirty air issues, and with the concrete, it just doesn't make the racing that great at tracks like this, to be honest. I think Nashville's had better races than what we saw this year. It wasn't completely awful. I will say this race is better than last year's event in 2024, where I thought that was one of the worst races I've probably ever seen. This one was not as bad as that, but it's definitely not really compelling, not inspiring. Just wasn't the greatest event overall, and that's why I have it pretty far down. I don't think the Cracker Barrel 400 this year was really that great. In the number 27 position, I had the Goodyear 400 from Darlington Raceway. Now, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised I have a Darlington race this far down the list, and I think that Fox definitely played a big role on this one because their coverage for this race was not very good. But if I'm going to be honest, going back to the raw feed of this race too, it wasn't that great, to be honest. It was extremely very difficult to pass. Now, it wasn't impossible to pass, but with Darlington, for instance, it's a one-groove track. And with how the issues with the cars we've seen, it can be very difficult to pass at this track. But generally, the spring race at Darlington has not been as compelling as the Southern 500 has been. And this one was no exception, in my opinion. I don't think this race was really that compelling, inspiring. Yes, it was cool to see Denny Hamlin win the race in that 11 Carl Edwards throwback. But to me, it wasn't that great overall. Just not much to say other than that. It was okay. It wasn't great. It definitely was not as bad as some will say it was, but it wasn't a great race overall and not the best racing we've seen from Darlington before. In the number 26 position, I have the Shriners Children 500 from Phoenix Raceway. When it comes to Phoenix races, I would say this actually was one of the better next-gen races we have seen at Phoenix. And it actually had a really good finish as well between Christopher Bell, Denny Hamlin, and Kyle Larson, because people forget Larson was in the picture to potentially steal the win from Hamlin and Bell if they end up crashing on the final restart. But to be honest with you, the next-gen car still has issues at this track. And the racing itself, I'll be honest, just wasn't that great in general. It wasn't a bad. I think the tire really actually helped the racing here. I think it was definitely one of the better Phoenix races we have seen in recent years. But when I'm saying this race wasn't great and it's still one of the better Phoenix races, that should tell the reputation of Phoenix on the Cup side of things, because the Xfinity race the prior day was actually a really solid and pretty compelling race. I don't think this was compelling. It wasn't the most inspiring. It wasn't great racing in general, and because of that, I've got it decently low on the list, but it wasn't as bad as other Phoenix races. Definitely almost better than the championship race last year. It was an okay race, but not a great race. In the number 25 position, I had the Enjoy Illinois 300 from Gateway International Raceway. Gateway's a track that's been hit or miss. I thought the 22 race I went to was okay, but not spectacular. I thought the 23 race was a little better than 22, and 2024 definitely took a little bit of a step back outside of the compelling finish. 2025, in my opinion, especially the first half of this race, I thought was definitely the best racing we have seen at Gateway in the next-gen car. Unfortunately, as the race progressed and went on, I feel like the racing kind of fell off a little bit, and I think this could have been a top 20 race had the second half been a lot better, and granted, we got a decent finish because Hamlin won the race, but to me, it just wasn't that great overall. It wasn't bad by any stretch of imagination. For Gateway standards, I thought it was great for the standards of that, but I don't think it was a spectacular race by any stretch of imagination. Better for Gateway. I think that the Gen 6 car would have raced a lot better here, to be honest. It was an alright race. Didn't get to go to the race this year. I thought it was alright, but it wasn't spectacular overall when it comes to the racing product. In the number 24 position, I have the 2025 Brickyard 400 from Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I actually think this race was better than 2024. Yes, there were dirty issues with the car, but I think what made this race better than some other races was a compelling ending. You had a great battle at the end. You had a compelling fuel mileage finish going on at this point, and you're wondering if Kyle Larson was going to have the chance and opportunity to catch Bubba Wallace, or if Bubba was going to lose the race. Unfortunately, rain caution came out, but I think the final few race stars was what made this race really exciting at the end, and you had a fantastic driver picking up the win and victory in Bubba Wallace. To me, for Brickyard 400 standards, it was all right. The coverage could have been a little better for sure, but it's definitely better than the Chicago street course coverage, but I think this race itself was definitely not bad by any stretch of imagination. For Brickyard 400 standards, I actually enjoyed this race quite a bit. Got a very interesting winner. To me, it was a solid race, but not a spectacular race, but I think it was a decent race for Brickyard 400 standards, because the Brickyard can be hit or miss, and it had a pretty compelling story at the end of the day. In the number 23 position, we have the NASCAR Cup Series Championship race from Phoenix Raceway. Of all next-gen races at Phoenix Raceway, I think this is up there as maybe the first or second best race I have seen at the track. I could argue the 2023 championship race was a little better. But I gotta say the racing product in this race was definitely all right. If we go by racing product standards, it was one of the better Phoenix races. Now, the tire issues definitely were a little bit frustrating to watch for sure. And then unfortunately how the race ended was definitely frustrating. You had a pretty good and compelling finish and a great battle at the end between Keselowski and Blaney. And the photo finish at the end was really fun to watch. But I just think that the unfortunate thing that hurts this race is how the finish ended and screwing Denny Hamlin, unfortunately, out of a shot at a championship. Those teams kind of put him in that bad position and seeing Larson get that second title. I think the racing itself was okay, but it wasn't great. It was a solid Phoenix race by the stretch. It was one of the better Phoenix races we've seen. I think it was definitely an all-race for sure at Phoenix Raceway. In the number 22 position, we have the Grand Park 165 at the Chicago Street Course. This race being up a little higher is probably going to surprise a lot of people, because I think a lot of people would have said that this race was not very good. And this is a race that unfortunately was a little bit affected by officiating issues. We had COTA where basically run into the tire barriers, and then of course you had another incident where I believe a driver ended up spinning out. I think it was Josh Berry, and the officiating crew was not able to get that. I think they had to talk about that quite a bit on the podcast that they did. But I think the racing itself was actually decent. You had a really competitive battle earlier between Michael McDowell and Shane Van Gisbergen early. And then you had a really fun watching SVG charge up through the field and charge up through the pack and get up there and take the lead late in this race and storm out and take the win in victory. I think that's what made this race pretty solid in my opinion. I think it was not as good as 24-23, but at least we got the full distance in before rain came into play. Thank God they moved the start of the race early. I think it was a decent race for sure. Not as good as 24, but a solid race at Chicago and a pretty decent racing product overall at the racetrack as well. In the number 21 position, I have the South Point 400 from Las Vegas Motor Speedway. This race, in my opinion, was a race that was definitely very intriguing. Yes, it was dominated by Kyle Larson, and yes, there were definitely some 550 components that we saw with the Gen 6 550 package that really came into play with this race. But I will say the battling up front throughout the race, I thought was actually really entertaining, and never really saw the leader pull out to a really big lead until the end of the race. Unfortunately, guys like Larson got screwed out of an opportunity to get the win at the end, but he had a really good battle at the end where Denny Hamlin charged his way up to the front, got the lead late, got a very emotional win, and that was actually really fun to watch at the end, and I think it was definitely one of the better finishes we saw in 2025. I think the racing itself for Vegas standards was actually pretty solid. I thought it was pretty good racing for sure. Really enjoyed the racing this year at Vegas. I think it was a solid race for sure, and only because the next gen isn't as good at the track, but it's not bad by any stretch of imagination. To me, I think the race this year, though, was actually pretty good. In the number 20 position, we have the 2025 Daytona 500. I will say, compared to other Daytona 500s, this one was definitely better than the 2024 one, and it might even be better a little bit than the 2023 Daytona 500. But again, this is some of the issues with the next-gen car, because NASCAR did make some adjustments to the next-gen car after this race took place. And I think the racing this time around, you had a lot of that gridlock going on. And it was a lot of the 3-4 wide racing, which I think is really cool. But I think at the same time, some people are not really attracted to that. And I can understand because there's a lot of the field saving going on. I'm not a big fan of the field saving. But once we got to the end of the race, you had a lot of the gridlock going on. And then it became a crash fest. You had controversy with when the caution should come out, when the yellow shouldn't come out in the race. I think that was definitely frustrating for sure. But I will say for Daytona 500 standards, it was all right. And I think the racing could have been better. Fox did a much better job. But to me, it was an all right Daytona 500 this year. It was decent. Not the best one I've ever seen. But I think it was an all right 500 this year and not a bad race. Just overall, the finish affected the outcome. And it was definitely of the scoring and why it's a little bit farther down on the list. In the number 19 position, we have the 2025 Cookout Southern 500 from Darlington Raceway. Now, this Southern 500 was unfortunately one of those that was affected by dirty air, but I think the whole entire race in general, say what you want to say, this is way better than the spring race. I think you had a really compelling day to watch. You really never had a dominant, outside of Chase Briscoe, dominated the race. You had a lot of really compelling battles throughout the race. I don't really think the dirty air issues were as prevalent in this one compared to 2024. That's what makes Darlington good, is that you have these long runs, and I think that's what makes races at the track that can be really, really fun to watch. And I don't think this one was an exception. Yes, the ending of the race with the dirty air was definitely a little bit annoying for sure, but I think it was overall a pretty solid race, all things considered. I actually did enjoy this race in a pretty big way. I think it was actually a decent race this year, better than 2024's ending, but I think the 2024 race is actually pretty solid last year. Again, issues with the next-gen car come into play every time, but I think it was a solid race for sure. Not spectacular, but I think for Southern 500 races, it was definitely one of those that's going to be memorable. Seeing Briscoe get his second straight one, I think that was definitely pretty compelling for sure. In the number 18 position, we have the Toyota Save Mart 350 from Sonoma Raceway. I don't know what's happened to Sonoma Raceway the last couple years, but I gotta be honest, the last couple Sonoma races, in my opinion, on the Cup side, I think have actually been really, really good, and this was no exception. Yes, Shaman Gisbergen dominated this race. I don't think anybody's denying that, but he got the field really close early in the race, and I think the racing itself at Sonoma was actually pretty intriguing to watch, because this track can be hit or miss at times when it comes to the racing product. Plus, you do have a softer tire that definitely can help the racing a little bit for sure. But I gotta be honest, I think this actually was really compelling. You had drivers that kept up with him throughout the day. You had Chase Briscoe be fast, Chase Elliott be fast, Ty Gibbs, Michael McDowell. And you had really good racing throughout. It was really fun also seeing SVG go up there and pass Kyle Larson for the stage win, despite the fact that Kyle Larson stayed out and SVG came down pit road. I think that was really fun to watch, and that's what made this race, I think, pretty fun for sure. I think it was definitely one of the better races at Sonoma in recent years, and a pretty good race overall. In the number 17 position, we have the Viva Mexico 250 from Mexico City. Despite the ending being a little bit boring for a lot of people, I would say the first two-thirds of this race before Shaman Gisbergen decided to go into SVG God mode at the end, I think the first two-thirds of this race was really fun to watch. It was very compelling. You had some chaos in this race, which isn't the worst thing overall at some points of the event. But I think the racing itself in general, up front especially, and people making moves and be able to make moves, I think that's what made this race, in my opinion, really fun and good to watch. And until Shaman Gisbergen took the lead late and dominated, you really didn't have the most crazy race overall. I think it was actually a pretty fun race in general, and it was a good return to Mexico. Plus, the prior day, you had a really good win for Daniel Suarez. I thought the Xfinity race is maybe a little bit better than the Cup race, but I think this race still was really, really fun to watch. It was good to go back to Mexico City. The racing was definitely fun. Good racing overall for sure. It sucks we're not going back there next year, but I think it was a pretty overall good race until SVG got the dominance and just pulled out to near 22nd lead, which is pretty incredible to watch. You can't deny that. I think itself was actually a pretty good race in general. In the number 16 position, we have the Bank of America Roval 400 from the Charlotte Roval. This one is probably going to be a little bit controversial that I have the Charlotte Roval race from this year up inside the top 20 or even inside the top half. But I think this race itself was actually a really, really good race. If you take away all the playoff conversation and playoff talk, you never really had the dominance from Shane Van Gisbergen until we got into the longer runs. Because on the short runs, SVG was not dominant. And it let guys like Christopher Bell and Kyle Larson get the chance and opportunity to be fast and compete against Shane Van Gisbergen. And they actually were ahead of him at points. And then, of course, watching the tires fall off, I thought the tire stuff maybe a little bit over chaotic at points like the Phoenix race. But I think the tires going and falling off a little bit made it interesting because you had to basically decide if you want to stay out long or come down the road, and then watch the guys come back up to the field who had fresher tires on the guys that had older tires. I thought that was really fun to watch. Yes, eventually Shane Van Gisbergen got a big lead, but you didn't know if he was going to make it to the end, and Shane just did what he does all the time, where he basically dominates and does great things. He did a fantastic job in this race, and I think it was definitely a pretty fun overall race at the Roval. I think it was a pretty good race in general. In the number 15 position, we have the Yellowwood 500 from Talladega Superspeedway. Take away basically the ending of the race. I think the race itself in the first half was actually not awful by any stretch of imagination. You didn't have the gridlock going on the whole entire race, which I think made this race a lot better. But what made this race go up inside the top half that I didn't think it would go in the top half this year is the ending of the race. I think the final 25 laps, the 30 laps of this race was really, really awesome to watch. It felt like watching Gen 6 racing from like 2017 or 2018 before they got the crazy package in 2019. I think it was one of the better next-gen races we have seen at this type of track, and I think in general it was a very, very good ending to the race. Now, the whole entire race itself wasn't amazing, but I think it was still one of the better races that we see in the next-gen era, which means that the next-gen super speed racing doesn't have overall the best standards. But again, I thought it was actually a really, really fun race to watch. You had a pretty good finish. You had a little bit of chaos at the end, seeing Chase Briscoe win. I thought that was kind of crazy to look at, but I think the racing itself is solid. I think it was better than the last two Talladega races from 2024, and certainly way better than 2025. The spring race, I should say. I think this one was pretty good, and one of the better races we've seen at Talladega with the next-gen car. I think it was definitely a pretty good overall event. In the number 14 position, we have the Mobile One 301 from New Hampshire Motor Speedway. This, in my opinion, is the best New Hampshire race we have seen with the next-gen car. The softer tires made this race really fun to watch. And you really never knew entirely who was going to win. But I thought the racing throughout the event was really, really good to watch. You didn't know who was going to win the race until the end because Josh Berry was running down Ryan Blaney, and dirty air was not a factor in that point. Josh Berry just made a big mistake, got behind Ryan Blaney, missed a corner a little bit, and just went up the track. And they battled really hard near the end of that race, and Blaney was closing in at the end, but unfortunately used his stuff up. Or Berry calls on Blaney quite a bit. And then watching Larson lead up points and Logano lead up points, it was actually a really fun race. And then once again, Goodyear delivering and putting on a good race with a really good tire. It was a very solid race, in my opinion, a really solid New Hampshire race. New Hampshire has not been the greatest track overall over the years. I think it was a pretty good race for sure, especially for next-gen standards. At a track like this, I think it was a very good race at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. In the number 13 position, I have the Avenel 400 from Kansas Speedway. If you look at races at Kansas Speedway in the next-gen era, I think majority of the races have been very, very good. The reason I have this race a little bit farther down than other Kansas races, this is probably the least compelling Kansas race that I probably have seen because Kyle Larson dominated. And even then, it was still a really, really good race in general. I think it's a race that's completely overhated in my opinion. Again, I think the big reason is because Kyle Larson dominated, but you had times where people challenged him. You had Chase Elliott come up there and challenge him, and then the team just floundered and made mistakes. Kyle Larson's team may not have been the best car in the long run, but they certainly were really good on the short runs, and Larson's team never floundered and make mistakes. And then you had a really fun ending to the race where you didn't know if he was going to hold on and win with the tires going off, and Bell and Blaney were running him down relatively fast and relatively quickly. So I think the racing itself was fun. I think it was definitely a good finish for sure to the end. Maybe not the best Kansas race overall, but I think it was still a pretty good event, and I think it was definitely a pretty solid race to watch at Kansas Speedway. In the number 12 position, I had the Straight Talk Wireless 400 from Homestead Miami Speedway. This is a race that I think actually is also a little bit underrated in general too. Is it the best Homestead race we've seen? No. Did it live up to the race from 2024? No. I think that 2024 race from last year, the fall event, I think that's one of the best races I have ever seen at Homestead Miami Speedway from start to finish. Well, it wasn't like that. I thought the racing was pretty good throughout the day. Yes, Blaney dominated, but you had a really compelling race where guys like Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson showed up, and then near the end, seeing Larson charge up from like 4th or 5th and steal the win from Alex Bowman and Bubba Wallace late. I thought that was really, really fun to watch, especially after a really good Truck Series race, which I think that truck race at Homestead was probably the best race of the year. I think this one was really, really good. I think it was a very fun race. Larson nearly swept the weekend. If not for a guy bringing out a caution with 5 to go, he would have likely won the Xfinity race and swept the weekend. Larson did a good job showing up there. I think the racing was pretty good, and I think Homestead put on a really good show in 2025, and that's why they're getting the championship race in 2026. In the number 11 position, I have the Pennzoil 400 from Las Vegas Motor Speedway. This race is actually a really good race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. It was about as good as the race in the fall at the South Point 400 in 2024, and probably similar to the 2022 South Point 400 as well. I thought the race from start to finish was really, really compelling because you never truly knew who was going to win the race. And then you got an awesome winner in Josh Berry picking up his first career cup win, and I think the racing in general was good. Yes, some next-gen issues came into play with dirty air, but I think the racing was actually really, really good throughout the day. It wasn't as good as the 2024 spring race, I will say, but it's definitely a really good race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and definitely up there as one of the better races we've seen with the next-gen car at this track. I really love the racing here. I think it was pretty fun, really, really good for sure. Love the racing itself, and pretty cool winner at the end of the day. And Josh, and almost seeing Daniel Suarez win that race here, Ryan Prix get the win would have been incredible. But I think it was a good race overall, and one of the best races we've seen from Vegas in the next-gen era. In the number 10 position, I have the Xfinity 500 from Martinsville Speedway. I think that this race is very, very close to how I felt about the Xfinity 500 from Martinsville in 2024. This race came very close to beating that one because, in my opinion, I think if you take away the manipulation from the race last year, I thought that race was really, really good with all the tire stuff going on. I was a little worried about if this race was going to have anything interesting going on. And to me, yes, William Byron and Ryan Blaney dominated, but the racing behind him was really good. It was not impossible to pass. Yes, it took some time for things to get into play, but once we got to the long runs, this is some of the best racing we've seen in Martinsville, and it felt like old school Martinsville in some way that I've kind of grew up watching as a kid. It felt like an old school race in some ways. I thought it was a really, really fun race to watch in general. Again, maybe not as good as the 24 fall race, but I thought it was still a very, very fun race to watch. I think that Goodyear once again delivered in this race. The tire fall, seeing guys gel, some guys be good on the long runs like Blaney and Byron, even Larson at points. Seeing guys be good on the short runs like Bell and Logano, then struggle as the race goes on. I think it was a good race. Plus, you saw William Byron probably showed the most emotion he's ever shown when he wins a race. I think it was a good race for sure and a pretty fun event this year at Martinsville Speedway. In the number 9 position, we have the Coke Zero Sugar 400 from Daytona International Speedway. I really enjoyed this race from start to finish. I think this race is actually better than the Talladega race about a month or so ago. I think this was a really good race at Daytona. The racing from start to finish was solid. You didn't really have a lot of the gridlock going on. And what made the race really awesome was the ending of the race. I don't know how they did it, but somehow they got that third lane working up there, which has been a major issue with the next-gen car. But they got that third and fourth lane working, and it led to one of the best finishes we have seen in the Cup Series this year. I think they were 4 wide across the line, I'm pretty sure, and Ryan Blaney came in and took that victory after being, I believe, 12th or 13th at the end and charged his way up to the front and got that victory. And I think it was just overall a very, very fun race to watch. Plus, Lee Diffie's call at the end I thought was really good because Lee Diffie's one of the best lead commentators in NASCAR history, in my opinion. I think the racing was phenomenal, very, very good, and I think that Daytona delivered, and I think the coverage also delivered on this race overall, in my opinion. In the number 8 position, we have the Cookout 400 from Richmond Raceway. This, in my opinion, is the best Richmond race we have seen in the next-gen car. I would probably say this about the 2024 race if not for the issues with Austin Dillon at the end where he intentionally wrecked the driver at the end of the race, or 2 drivers, that being Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin. This race was really, really good, and the tires worked so well. And it felt like old Richmond, where you could have multiple groups on the track. You had guys on the bottom, guys running the top. Seeing Shane Van Gisbergen run his own different lane up on that top line and making it work and nearly getting a top 10 was impressive on his own. But then the long run where we saw Bubba Wallace lead and Tyler Reddick lead, and then Ryan Blaney and Austin Dillon battle for the win, and then Alex Bowman almost come up there and pick up the win and chart his way up to the front. I think this race was really compelling. One of the best short track races we have probably seen in the next gen era. I think it was phenomenal. I think it was absolutely just really fun to watch in general. And Austin Dillon got redemption. Well, not redemption. He kind of made his own thing, but he got basically redeemed himself after what he did last year by intentionally wrecking someone and did it straight up, did it the right way, the clean way. And I think that's what made this race really, really good for him. And I think in general, it was a fun race because of all the tire stuff going on in the event. In the number 7 position, I have the Echo Park Automotive Grand Prix from Circuit of the Americas. This is one of the best road course races we have seen in the next gen era. Maybe the best one we have seen in the next gen era from start to finish. The race from the whole entire day was really good. Early, you have Kyle Busch who showed the most speed he would show this year, and he and Shane Van Gisbergen will put on a really good show early. You had a lot of tires falling off early in this race. As the race progressed, you had Christopher Bell emerging, Chase Briscoe emerging, and then the final battle for the last 5 to 10 laps. Unfortunate that Fox did not do a good job with coverage in this race, but I think it was a very intriguing and really exciting race. And that battle at the end for the final 10 to 15 laps, that final run, I thought was really, really good to watch because we all thought Kyle Busch was going to hang on and win. He then unfortunately lost that race at the end, but then he had a great battle seeing Bell come in and swoop and take the victory. I think it was just a really, really good race in general. I think it was a fantastic event. Circuit Americas delivered. I think it was the best road course race we've seen in the next gen era. And I think for fans who watch this race, I think they were treated to an all-time classic race at Circuit Americas. Very enjoyable, really great to see. Enjoyed the race itself, and I think it was definitely a very solid and pretty fun race at Circuit of the Americas in 2025. In the number 6 position, we have the Ambetter Health 400 from Atlanta Motor Speedway. Well, this is not as good as a 2024 spring race at the track where we saw a fantastic photo finish. This race did not disappoint. It was really, really solid in my opinion. Again, the next gen car when it comes to super speedway racing, this is the best super speedway, and it's a 1.5 mile super speedway. The racing just was really, really good. He had guys moving to the inside, the outside, making passes, making really impressive moves. The reason this is not a little higher is because of the ending, unfortunately, and the controversial call, where NASCAR would actually throw the caution on the white flag of the race before the checker flag took out, and you were potentially looking at a 3-wide finish across the line between Christopher Bell, Carson Osmar, and Kyle Larson. Two of those guys aren't great at super speedways, and Carson Osmar looking for his first career Cup Series win. I think in general, though, it was a really, really good race itself. I think the racing was phenomenal to watch. The guys making the moves they needed to make. I think that's what made this race really good overall to watch in general, and I do think Atlanta absolutely delivered. It was a very solid event, really good racing for sure, and I think the Ambetter Health was pretty good this year in 2025. In the number 5 position, I have the FireKeepers Casino 400 from Michigan International Speedway. This is the best race I have seen in Michigan in the Cup Series since the repave happened at this track in 2012. I don't remember another race at this track that was this good at Michigan. Maybe like 2011, 2010, maybe like back in 09 when Brian Vickers picked up the win. That was probably the last time I've seen a race that was this good. You had so many lead changes happening throughout the day. You had guys getting incredible runs and making incredible passes throughout this race. You had guys running up at the top groove, the middle groove, the bottom groove. So much good multi-groove racing. And you had a really compelling fuel mileage finish at the end because you weren't entirely sure if people were going to make it at the end and have enough gas to make it to the checker flag at the end. But I really thought this race was so good. And it also helps the fact that Prime did a phenomenal job with the coverage in this race. They did a good job letting you know what's going on with the fuel mileage. And I think that's what made this race also so fun and great to watch in general. I think Michigan has continued to deliver with the next gen car. That's why the infield camp is already sold out for next year. I think it was a great race seeing Denny Hamlin win the race on fuel mileage, beating Carson Osmar, William Byron at the end. I think it was a very good race in general. Very fun. And I think Michigan delivered once again like it has the last couple years because the next gen car also raced livers like Auto Club. And we know Auto Club was really good with this car. I think the racing was really good in 2025 here. In the number 4 position, I have the Hollywood Casino 400 from Kansas Speedway. Now, I went to this race in 2025. I had a lot of fun. The first time I've ever been to a Kansas race. And I got to say, not only is the facility great, but the racing is always really good at the track. And there's a reason why a lot of people are going to Kansas Speedway now, because I think this race was really, really good to watch. Yes, Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell dominated the race, and really Denny Hamlin dominated the race. But I think the racing throughout the day was really good. I could see the multi-groove racing happening on the track. Guys going to the bottom, the inside, the outside. The racing at Kansas is just perfect for this next-gen car. And the racing was great too. And then that finish at the end was the best finish I have seen in 2025. That was so fun to watch at the end. The guys making moves to the inside, the outside. Then Denny Hamlin moving Bubba Wallace up the track. Chase Elliott coming in and storming the win. Lee Diffie's call at the end. That was so fun to watch and a great finish. And a lot of fans left the track very, very happy who enjoyed and went to the race. I think that Kansas delivered this year. It was just an amazing race in general. The atmosphere being there was incredible. I think that's what made this race good. It was better than the 2024-5 spring race for sure. Really fun race at Kansas. One of the better Kansas races we've seen in the next-gen car. And Kansas had some really good races in the racing years. So I think this was absolutely a really good race overall. In the number 3 position, we have the Bass Pro Shops night race at Bristol Motor Speedway. I think you can make an argument that this Bristol race was even better than the 2024 spring race at the track. And the Food City 500 from last year at the track, I said was maybe the best or one of the 2 or 3 best races of 2024. This one this year was better in my opinion because yes, you had a lot of the tire chaos going on in this race, but the bottom groove worked very, very well. And it felt like old school Bristol. And a lot of people are big fans of old school Bristol. They don't like top lane Bristol, but it led to short track temperies. You had drivers that were upset with other drivers on the track. You had drivers angry and livid throughout the night, and that's what made Bristol back in the day so fun to watch in like the 2000s and maybe even the late 2000s as well in the 90s too, because I think that's what made Bristol really amazing. And then the finish itself was solid. You weren't even entirely sure who was going to pick up the win in victory. I think you felt so good to watch this race. I think it was really, really good. I think after Kansas, especially where that race delivered, I think this delivered as well. I was really worried about this race going in, but I think that we all saw a really good and a strong and great race at this track. Seeing Bell come in and storm and take the win. Seeing a lot of fun racing throughout the day. A lot of lead changes, a lot of passes. I think that's what made this race really awesome to watch in general. In the number 2 position, we have the 2025 Coca-Cola 600 from Charlotte Motor Speedway. This, of course, was the first race for Amazon Prime Day ever broadcasted, and I think this race absolutely delivered from start to finish. Yes, William Byron dominated this race and led pretty much the whole entire event. But let's not forget, the racing as the day went on was really, really good. You had a great battle points between Denny Hamlin and William Byron. You had a great battle between Carson Nosbar showed up between those guys. And you had other drivers showing up. You had Larson lead early before he made mistakes. There was so much compelling stuff going on. And then at the end of the race, watching Ross Chastain charge his way up to the front and come in and maybe steal the win from William Byron after dominating the race and winning the Xfinity Series race that prior day. And then just watching the emotion after the race, the long press, basically post-race coverage they had, and just they did a phenomenal job with their coverage. But I think the racing itself too at Charlotte Motor Speedway, I think we can all agree that 2024 race was definitely an anomaly because for 3 of the last 4 races at the track, I think were phenomenal. And if they would have let the race finish last year, I think that could have been an all-time great race as well. But this race was spectacular to watch. Dale Jr. calling it. Adam Alexander did a phenomenal job. And I think in general, this race absolutely delivered as one of the best races of 2025. It was spectacular. It was great. Really good racing at Charlotte Motor Speedway. And that's why people want the fall race at Charlotte to come back, because racing like this was good. And I think it was definitely a very fun race to watch in general in 2025. Which that means in the number 1 position, I have the Quaker State 400 from Atlanta Motor Speedway. The summer race from Atlanta. There's really close between this one, the Coke 600, and probably the Bass Pro Shops night race. I think this race was so good, though. I think the fact that you had a lot of people falling out of this race, once they got to a smaller pack, this is when the race shined. You had guys making moves to the inside. You had guys making runs every lap or so. You had guys timing those runs. So much side by side. Just guys making moves they needed to make to get up there. Atlanta, the next gen car, has delivered, and this race was one of those races that delivered. Guys going from the inside, outside, making the big-time moves they necessarily needed to go out there and try to contend for the win. And I think this race was just so fun to watch as a fan. I think the coverage could have been a little better, but I think this was very, very good racing. You had guys just showing up, SVG being fast in the race, leading some laps. You had Chase Elliott winning the race in front of his crowd at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And I just think you had guys making daring moves on the track. You had craziness happening. You had chaos happening in this race. But for me, it was the best race of the year because of that. I think the track delivered once again. I think it was one of the better Atlanta races we've seen. It's very close to the race from 2024, where I thought that race was one of the best races I've ever seen. This one was definitely one of the best races I have seen as a fan. It was really awesome to watch. Atlanta delivered. Watching Keselowski and Elliott battle throughout the night was great too. And I think we delivered one of the best races we have seen at the next-gen car at the track. I think the Quaker State 400 this year was a phenomenal race in 2025. So, that is going to be it for every single NASCAR Cup Series points paying race ranked for the 2025 year. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's get some below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What's your rankings for the 2025 season from the worst to the best? Let me know it in the comments below. If any major news breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. But tomorrow, we are going to be doing the top 20 drivers to watch out for the 2026 season. Then Monday, if we don't have a NASCAR news video on the channel, which we got some stuff on Corey Day, Parker Resav, and Shane Gisberg and Connor Zilic too, we are going to, of course, then have potentially the first team preview video drop for Hendrick Motorsports. And next weekend, also, we are going to have the winter predictions to the Cup Series for 2026 dropping. We get lawsuit updates to talk about that as well. We got some fun content dropping this week, NASCAR news videos, among other things, dropping throughout the week. We got content coming up, people like Haley Deegan, Shane Gisberg, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bolas, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Frankie Muniz, Cletus Savaro, Dodge Ram, Brad Keselowski, Connor Zilic, Junior Motorsports, Daniel Suarez, other stuff like Ross Chastain, you name it. Sam Mayer, Sheldon Creed, all the good stuff. Carson Quaffle 2, we'll talk about on the channel in the coming days and weeks as well, along with Will Brown, Brock Feeney, Cam Waters as well. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.